Or Orlando is a great example of this as well, with Jonathan Isaac, with Wendell Carter, young guys that are definitely a part of their core long term, but don't really fit within the criteria of what we're talking about necessarily. Um, Really interesting idea. I love this so much. And I want you to go first. The first team that you listed was the Orlando Magic. And I think it's worth starting with the Magic, if only because they had the number one overall pick this year. They have a really interesting group of players to kind of break down, just in terms of trying to figure out, like, who are the guys here? Like, where does each player fit into the buckets that you kind of pre-prescribed in terms of, is this a foundational piece? Is this just a guy? Is this X, Y, and Z? Like, there are two picks in the 2021 NBA draft, Franz Wagner and Jalen Suggs. Just to take an example, like, these two guys kind of flipped, I thought, throughout the course of the year in a pretty substantial way. So, again, I'm just going to give you the floor and give you the opportunity to kind of direct this discussion. And then at the end, maybe we'll try and contextualize it all together with all of these teams and try to, come to maybe not an agreement, but just kind of state where we are in terms of who are the teams that we like the most moving forward here.
Yeah, of course. And I think Orlando was only really listed first because they had the first overall pick. Like you said, the newest addition to their roster in this context is, in my opinion, the top guy that was just drafted, Paolo Banchero. When we talk about the three pillars, I think it's worth also noting that not each pillar is always going to be built to the same size or strength, right? Like, there are some players that carry a heavier burden than others, even though they can be in your focal point of top two or three guys. And to me, Orlando hit a home run just by getting a guy like Banchero, because he can be that number one option offensively. I still think that's what you draft for, first and foremost. So when you have the opportunity to add a guy to your roster that does that, take advantage of it. So I loved the Banchero pick there, but that changes the way the other pieces around them kind of fit in and blend together to bring out the best strengths of Paolo's game. So I'm glad you brought up the kind of flip-flopping of, Suggs and Franz and the potential that goes there, because I think Franz works off of Paolo incredibly well, where when they play the 3 and the 4, they're both interchangeable a little bit on the offensive end where they can handle. Franz is great at catching the ball already going downhill and making quick decisions. I think Paolo is going to be operating a ton at the elbows, the top of the key, and in isolation areas where you have a need for smart cutters and off-ball floor spacers in a way that Franz can be. And he's proven that, in moments when maybe Paolo's not on the floor, he can handle a little bit more of a creation aspect. So I think that those two mesh incredibly well together. I think the jury's still out on whether Franz is more of a guy that's a third option and a really high-scoring complementary piece on a good team, or if he can really carry being the secondary creator in a playoff series. It's a lot of future conversations to be had, because Orlando's not ready for that right now. And these guys have growth that needs to go into that. But from a roster construction standpoint, that's what I'm really wondering about long-term. Are these the top two options, or is it more 1 and 3 or 2B with Franz?
Yeah, it's interesting because Franz obviously did not play for a good team this year. But when I watched Franz, he was almost the guy outside of Scotty and Evan and Cade, where I just was like, oh no, this guy is like tailor-made to be on a winner. And there are a number of reasons why. You kind of mentioned it. The thing about Paolo is always going to stop the ball a little bit. That's just kind of who he is. He passes exceedingly well, but he's going to stop and survey. Like, it's very rarely going to be like a quick touch pass, right? In the case of Franz, I'm so glad you brought up the idea of quick decision making, because that's what he is. He's a very, very quick decision maker that I think is just perfect in terms of being able to play with Paolo and being able to actualize Paolo and being able to play without the ball while still making an impact with the floor spacing, with the cutting, with the ability to put the ball on the deck and make that quick decision off of those For instance, like Paulo is going to hit him on kickouts to the corner, and he's going to see his man downhill closing out at him, and then Franz is just already going to be ready to go. He's already going to be ready to just attack the basket in a pretty substantial way when he needs to. And then he can play off of the pass as well. He's a really, really smart, intuitive passer. So that combination I really love. And you and I have actually weirdly not talked a lot about Paulo in public spaces.
Yeah.
And Matt and I were, I don't think we were low on Paulo by any stretch, but we both had him. I had him at number 3. I think Matt had him at number 4. I really like Paulo. I loved all 3 of these top guys. I thought they were all top tier players. It was just like 1A, 1B, 1C for me at the end of the day. But I did have Paulo at 3, and I stand by that. The reason was that while I do see your point that Paulo, I think, has the best chance to be the lead initiator of an offense, I worry about defense and efficiency a little bit more with Paulo in terms of what the scalability of his role is. Where are you on Paulo, and why, if I remember correctly, did you have him number 1? I can't remember.
Yeah. Numero uno. Yep. Numero uno. And it came down a lot to the offensive side of the floor. I hate qualifying statements. So I think the issue with him on defense is he's good when he's engaged. As a coach, you hate to hear that because you want a guy who's constantly engaged. You want a guy who's always going to bring that type of consistent effort. But I think it also speaks to the capability that he has to continue to grow and get better in those ways. I also think that role players can be really defensive minded and insulate a star player in a lot of positive ways. So again, I think the harder thing to do, and you and I have talked about this in different contexts before, is to find that efficient top level scorer, right? You can find replacement level scoring is easy to find, but elite level scoring is irreplaceable. So I think Paulo brings that to the table. I'm willing to take the lumps of roster construction that come around him. Is he a 4 or a 5 defensively? What's he best served doing? Like, you can build that structure with the right role players and find those guys. I'd rather have the talent and the scoring and the offensive creation that he brings.
Yeah, I think it's just a little bit harder to build that insulation if you have to play him at the 5. I think that for him to be successful on defense, it's going to have to be at the 4. And he has that ability. I worry a little bit about the foot speed. I worry a little bit about what his frame looks like when he's like 24, 25, as opposed to, because he's already 250 pounds. He's just an enormous dude. He carries it well right now. And, maybe he ends up just continuing to carry it well long-term. Wouldn't surprise me at all. But, we're talking just so on the margins at the end of the day between these guys. And you have to come up with I can say the same thing. Like, I'm worried about Chet's frame, and I'm worried about the fact that Jabari struggles to dribble. All of these things are real. And in the case of Paulo, I guess I'm just like, I worry that the foot speed stuff and whether or not how the frame ages and everything, that concerns me just like a touch more in terms of scaling toward a great winning situation than the other two. And really it comes down to like, would you rather draft the number 2 guy on a winning team, or would you rather draft the number 1 guy on like a mid-tier team? And I don't know. Like, honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I think in this draft, I kind of lean toward like the number 2 on the mid-tier team, which might just be a fucking terrible idea, to be honest. I don't know how smart I feel about that, especially after watching Paulo at Summer League. And after watching him, we've seen him a lot, but just the way his game scaled at Summer League, I thought was incredibly impressive. Matt and I talked about the passing throughout the year, and I thought that his passing was the most underrated skill of any lottery pick in this draft. But yeah, I don't know. I'm fascinated by the way Paulo's career ends up. And now Orlando has 2 of these guys where I really love them pre-draft in Paulo. I didn't really love Franz pre-draft. I was just wrong about Franz in every single way. But now we have Jalen Suggs, and I love Jalen pre-draft, and I still like a lot of what Jalen can bring. It's just going to be dependent on the shot. If Jalen Suggs shoots it, I still think he's going to be an all-star. I just have less confidence in the shot than what I did pre-draft.
Agree. Yeah. Pre-draft, I was pretty high on the shot, the mechanics, the translatability. I thought that he showed progress throughout his 1 year at Gonzaga of figuring it out, especially when teams went under. Like there were a lot of teams in the WCC that just blanket went under against them. I think Pepperdine did, Pacific might have for a period of time, and he was able to punish them and be able to play within that. Now that's different to do with NBA line, NBA spacing, NBA length that ends up contesting right around the screen. But the big thing when you add a guy like Paolo, who, as you said, more ball stopper, more heliocentric, ball's got to play through him at elbows, tops of the keys, short mid post areas. Jalen has to be able to shoot, or at least be an all-world defender. Like those are the two ways that he really makes an impact next to somebody like that. I think he's a great pick and roll creator. I haven't seen the Magic really commit to giving him that type of role or leash year one, which leads me to believe one of two things. Either that's not how they envisioned him and don't think he's ready for that type of responsibility, or I was just kind of wrong on a lot of the evaluation side of things. I think the injury your first year in the league really leaves that a lot of a question mark moving forward. And anytime we're going to talk about Suggs, I think we have to talk about the rest of that backcourt fulcrum. Cole Anthony has been pretty good. He's definitely deserving of minutes on an NBA team. I loved RJ Hampton pre-draft. He hasn't necessarily pulled in a ton of minutes and consistency there. He's the third man out in that backcourt rotation, or really fourth when you factor in Markelle Fultz. There are a lot of young guards there to try to develop. And it may end up being that the best one for the team is the one who fits next to Paolo and Franz best.
I think that's probably the right take, to be honest. And this is where like the Fultz thing comes in, because Markelle is like a very good NBA basketball player now. Not like a star, not what we thought he was, but he's a great defender. He's a really good passer. He sets the table well. I still am pretty hesitant on the shot long term. Mostly because teams don't really care if he shoots. Like I know that the numbers from mid-range particularly are actually kind of okay, but the problem for the Magic in that case is that the reason is that NBA teams just don't really care if he's shooting. Like they kind of just go way under everything because that's still what the book is on him. And they're just like, yeah, fuck it. Like whatever, let him go. Right. And how he reacts to that is going to be interesting. Can he develop that shot moving forward? If he can, I'm interested in Markelle for sure. I think Markelle is like definitely a top 30 NBA point guard at this point. Right. And his game is weird. It's funkier than what we envisioned, but he is actually a useful NBA player now. Cole, I'm a little bit less sold on as anything other than a sixth man. The efficiency is still a concern, and the physical tools that he has, I think like you can actually see the limitation gears turning when you watch him a little bit, just in terms of the way he finishes around the basket. His 2-point percentage is very low. He has like really become a pretty effective shooter. I know he shot like 34 from 3 last year, but I buy him mostly when he's coming around the screen and, get some space. Like I think he's probably going to knock it down. But defensively, efficiency wise, I think it's just going to be hard for him to live. So I think there is a wide open spot for Jalen Suggs still to be the guy. He is a great defender already. I thought he was like sneaky better than Davion Mitchell this year defensively, even though Mitchell got a lot of the hype because of just the effort that Davion brings to the table. And this isn't to say that Davion isn't a great defender. He absolutely is. It's just that I think Jalen Suggs is a genuinely great defender for a young player. Really good passer. I like the passing that I saw this year. Obviously a great open court player. We'll be able to speed up the game when guys like Paolo and Franz maybe slow it down a little bit more. I'm I'm still in on Jalen Suggs, and that's why I like this core a lot. Like, I actually really like the way that Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs work together. I think I'm probably a little bit lower on all of the RJ Hampton, Chuma Okeke, Caleb Houston group that exists there. Caleb Houston had a pretty good summer league comparatively, but it's a limitation game with him. Like, you really have to limit him to being a floor spacer, and that's kind of it, because that's what he can do now. But I like the top three quite a bit, and I'm just going to be fascinated to see how they integrate Jonathan Isaac back in with that front court of the future. How do you integrate Wendell Carter in? Do you play Paulo at the 5 a bit? They kept Mo Bamba for reasons kind of beyond my personal comprehension. I don't. How many minutes, the roles that these guys play, I'm so intrigued by it. I don't know what to envision when I watch this team.
Yeah, and I think that's what still needs to be figured out, and their primary objective as a franchise should be for the next year. Do we give Paolo closing minutes at the 5 and just go smaller and offensive minded with Isaac and Franz at the 4 and the 3? Do we go at all with like a 2-3-4 giant lineup with length of Wagner, Isaac, and Banchero there? And if you do that, does that mean you need more floor spacing at the 1 than what Suggs can always provide?
Or ball handling, even.
Right?
Because playmaking and like ball handling ability at that point. Because I like Franz as a handler at the 4. I don't love him as the ball handler at the 2. Paulo can initiate and do stuff, but here's the other thing: like, Jalen Suggs actually needs to tighten up his handle a little bit. So I don't think you could run that lineup with Jalen Suggs right now and make it work. So yeah, they're in even from a skill perspective, not just from a lineup, roster crunch perspective, it's kind of weird, I think. Yeah.
Like the pieces individually of that top 3. Love the Franz Paolo fit, but really want to see a little bit more about how Suggs fits in offensively. And that's not as much about Suggs and those 2 in a vacuum as much as it is the other pieces that have to play on the floor around him, or at least the ones that they already have.